passions that I have is about outcomes. And we want to make sure that organizations were really telling the story of impact. So one of the first things that we did was we went out and started looking, and I actually reviewed 50 websites that said that they had an impact report. And what we found was that many of the organizations were communicating what they called impact, but it really wasn't an outcome, and it really wasn't return on investment. It was inputs or outputs. So I want to take just a second and explain the difference between input, output, outcome, and ROI. So inputs are things that come into your program. Think about it as data, people, resources coming into your organization. So an input might be the number of hotline calls. It might be a number of intakes into your emergency shelter. The output is going to be how many nights that person stayed, how many safety plans were completed because of the hotline calls that were done. A good way to think about inputs and outputs is if you can count them on your fingers, or you can use little hash marks and count them, it's an input or an output. It is not an outcome. An outcome is how that person's life is transformed because you performed those services. Too often, our organizations are saying, we had this many people we sheltered, or this many nights of shelter, or this many safety plans, and this is our outcome. Well, it's not an outcome. And major donors know that, and they're sophisticated, and they have that figured out. So when you say your outputs are outcomes, you're falling short of what they're looking for. So they're looking for things like how many abusers stopped abusing, how many survivors actually were permanently housed. And if we want to take that one step further and talk about return on an investment, that's when we're going to be talking about the dollars saved because that person is now permanently housed and they're not homeless on the street. The dollars saved per injury averted, or the dollars saved by decreasing the stress on the legal system because there's less domestic violence going on. So all of these things are critically important for you to understand as we move forward and start talking about outcomes and outputs. Because when we ask the question, do you use outcomes or outputs, 78%, it was actually around a little over 50%, plus 22% just didn't even know how they counted it at all, but 78% are output focused. Only 22% of the people that surveyed said that they actually reported outcomes. This is a huge problem when we're talking about major donors. When you take a look at nationally what major givers say they want, it's outcomes. Now, this is not unique to nonprofits. 71% of nonprofits say that they struggle with outcomes, but it is an area that has to improve if domestic violence organizations are ever going to be competitive in the philanthropic market. Now, we know that data is hard to find, as we mentioned earlier, and that's going to have to be something that gets addressed, but we have to step back and quit saying that we're talking about impact when we're really not doing that at all.